Liminality. It's everywhere nowadays, but us Fallout fans have experienced it for years. The 3D Fallout games are soaked in liminality. You could say it's totally baked into the very soul of the design philosophy of the games themselves. So why make a super long video about it? What's so interesting about it? I'm working and have worked on videos that go deep into dramatic storytelling, blah blah, etc, but sometimes you can find fascination in something quiet, just the vibes. Like many of you, I've spent years roaming these games and my mind is filled with a lot of memories of firefights and barely escaping with my life from some insane situation. But it's also filled with memories of Fallout's absolute plethora of quiet, empty places that feel wrong in just the right way. These are spots that sometimes even have no enemies, no obvious danger, and indeed often no clear purpose at all. As you know, over the years I've trawled forums for player stories and sentiment too, and I've seen other players beyond myself often identifying them as liminal spaces as well. It's borrowing a term that usually means a threshold or in-between state. But in this context, liminal gets used to describe any place in-game that feels unnatural, lonely, ephemeral, somehow stuck between what was and what comes next. And maybe even actually acting as a bridge between more significant locations, or going nowhere at all. These are the places that could be called mundane locations, made more significant by their emptiness combined with the post-apocalyptic context. In the 3D Fallout games, these liminal spaces are proper intense to experience. They are sometimes emotionally empty in the moment, but charged with the melancholy of memory. Sometimes detached from the main flow of the game, and sometimes even from the game's underlying system itself. Some of them are created intentionally, others feel like strange accidents of design or remnants of content that never got finished. Some you'll only ever see through glitching out of bounds or using console commands. But together they all share that liminal feeling, a sense you've gone somewhere you shouldn't have, or stayed too long in a place that shouldn't really exist anymore, that was left behind by time. And believe me, we are going to be drinking deep of this vibe in this video. Before we dive in though, a quick note. If you enjoy this kind of content, please consider subscribing, liking, hyping, sharing, commenting, all that good stuff. Your support genuinely helps keep this going, and a massive thank you to all my Patreon supporters and channel members for making videos like this possible. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get back into the descent into liminal vibes. So regarding the word liminal, it's always a good idea to know what a word means when you're using it as often as I will be in this video, so let's make sure we have that meaning down early doors. The term liminal comes from the Latin word limen, meaning threshold. In anthropology, it was first used to describe the transitional stage of rites of passage, the point where someone is no longer who they were, but not yet who they'll become. It's the in-between, basically. Over time, the idea of liminality moved from anthropology into broader use, coming to refer to places, states, moments, or anything else really that sits between categories. Airports, empty schools at night, motels with flickering lights and nobody at the front desk, soon to be closed or abandoned shopping malls. In the last decade or so, liminality has taken on a life of its own online. One of the biggest expressions of this is the Backrooms, a creepypasta concept that imagines an endless labyrinth of yellow-walled, fluorescent-lit office space existing outside the bounds of normal reality. Originally spawned from a single image posted on 4chan, the idea exploded into a whole subgenre of horror. Players made fan games, YouTubers documented their fictional exploration and created entire web series around it, and the concept itself became a bit of a shorthand for the uncanny in-between places that make you feel uncomfortable, but wanting more because they trigger the need to explore them. And Fallout? Well, Fallout is absolutely filled with places that trigger that same feeling. Not in the jump scare sense, but in the quiet, creepy sense. This hallway goes nowhere, this bunker looks like it was left in a hurry, this shopping mall should be bustling but there's only the sound of the wind. It's a quiet kind of horror. What's interesting is that Fallout doesn't need to add liminality. As I touched upon earlier, it's baked into the world itself. For those unaware, the whole series is set in the aftermath of a civilization-ending event, in a transitory period between destruction and recovery. The old world is gone, but the new one isn't fully formed yet. Vaults hold on to fragments of the past, the wasteland struggles to build the future. You, the player, are often a figure who bridges the gap, a courier, a vault dweller, a lone wanderer, the physical manifestation of that which moves between defined states or destinations. In a sense, Fallout is liminal by definition, and when you layer that setting with game design choices, you get what are, in my opinion, some of the most affecting examples of digital liminality in any game. So, what follows is a journey through what I think are some of the most liminal places and moments in Fallout's 3D single-player games. Why single-player? Well, for me, exploring these vibes is a solo experience. We'll go through them game by game in an ascending order of what I find to have that vibe the strongest, starting with Fallout 3, then Fallout 4, and then New Vegas. Picking out locations you can visit in normal gameplay, then venturing into weirder territory. Unreachable places, developer testing rooms, basically some of the strangest dead ends hidden away in the back rooms of these games. After that, we'll touch on how these ideas have inspired other media, like the fantastic Dr. Bosch series. But first, let's begin with Fallout 3. One of the creepiest places in terms of liminal vibes, I think anyway, is the presidential metro. Introduced in the Broken Steel expansion, this section of the game lets you explore a secret subterranean government transit system. In mechanical terms, it's a quest-critical dungeon with ghouls, robots, and a train ride. But in mood and structure, it's something else entirely. It is, in every sense, a transitional space, and a surprisingly potent one at that. What makes the presidential metro so unsettling is that you're walking through a vision of a world long gone, but somehow still there, mostly. A clean, secured, government-only metro line designed to shuttle senators and top brass beneath the Capitol in the event of a crisis, now damaged but preserved, and crawling with ferals. The complex is governed by a pre-war AI named Margot, the Metro Authority Rapid Governmental Transit System. The fact she's still functioning adds to that feeling of an abandoned place. She sits there alone in the decaying surroundings, trying to keep it in order despite the impossibility of the task. She mentions the fact that the line hasn't been used in 200 years and 8 months. That's an astonishing detail. It means this place has been waiting silently for you, its next rider, for the entire post-war history of the Capital Wasteland. It's a system frozen in time, reawakened by you, the first eyes to see it for 2 centuries. And unlike the other metros in Fallout 3, the presidential metro feels a bit too clean. Not pristine, definitely mouldering, but yeah. It has the feeling of a recently abandoned place, or somewhere abandoned long ago but preserved in amber. The place hasn't been totally destroyed like almost everything else, it's idly mouldering away and decaying. There's something incredibly liminal about the way space behaves down here. Fallout 3's level design often gives players big open spaces with sightlines and landmarks, or there'll be dark, confusing dungeons you could easily get lost in. The presidential metro is neither of these. It's narrow, sterile, geometrically repetitive, and it's even creepier when all the enemies are dead and it's quiet. It feels like a tomb. I was always glad to be out of the place when playing the game, despite being fascinated by it. There's a different kind of liminal vibe coming from a similar but distinct set of locations, the Washington DC Metro. Loads of entrances, a warren of connected tunnels, an entire underworld of buried infrastructure left to rot. Functionally, it's a level design solution. The DC metropolitan area and the overworld is blocked by debris walls that made the game able to run on limited hardware. So Bethesda had to provide players with a way to move through the map using underground pathways. But what that results in, whether they intended it or not, is a labyrinthine sprawl of transit tunnels that feel detached from both time and surface reality. They are places that feel wrong, claustrophobic, easy to get lost in, and they're scary beyond being filled with screaming feral ghouls. Sometimes it feels like they go on too long, they repeat, you eventually just want to get out again, even into a desolate wreck of a world. Liminality has a visual colour palette vibe to it too beyond geometry. The metro tunnels really have that. Down here is beige, grey, greenish. Combined with low ambient light, the effect is like walking through old security camera footage. Grainy and distinct, you're left to find your way through it. And structurally, in terms of transport systems, this kind of space is inherently a place of transition. You're always between locations, never quite arriving, never quite departing, or at least it feels that way when you're wandering around down there. I will never forget when I first went to Washington DC and travelled the metro. That was way back in 2009, not long after Fallout 3 came out, so the metro system from the game was still fresh in my mind. There was a bit of a feedback loop there in my head. The memories of the game made reality feel a bit unreal, and when I returned home and booted up the game, having seen the places in real life, only made the game's interpretation far more vibey and creepy to experience. Next, we're going to take a look at Arlington Cemetery, a wide, quiet expanse of the dead that feels weirdly untouched by the nuclear Armageddon. I find it to be one of the spookiest and most liminal spaces in the entire game. There's not much to go here for in terms of actual quests or things to do. Most players would come across it usually by accident when exploring, and then they realise it's one of the loneliest, stillest places in the whole Capital Wasteland. The real-world Arlington National Cemetery is a site of tradition and national reverence. Fallout 3 doesn't try to parody or deface that. Instead, it shows the same terrain through the lens of time and neglect. The place is crumbling, but the rows of headstones remain. So does the layout, and so does the silence, and that's what makes it vibey and unsettling. This isn't a desecrated site, it's an abandoned one, a meta-graveyard, a memorial as much for the world that was as the people who were already interred there. No one and nothing is going anywhere, it's a place of stasis with only you as a traversal force. You can feel trapped by that aura even standing outside unless you keep moving. It is, in every way, a place between places. Tranquility Lane is something else entirely. Before you even get down there, the vault it's in feels liminal, abandoned, cold, empty, creepy as hell, with the robo-brains quietly moving around. In the simulation, it's pristine but uncanny with the film noir grayscale. Trees are in bloom, the sun shines, the streets are freshly paved, the houses are tidy, suburban, picture perfect. But you know before being told that something is deeply wrong. Players consistently flag Tranquility Lane as one of the most disturbing sequences in Fallout 3, mostly because the place pretends to be normal. Tranquility Lane is outside the real world in the most literal sense. It's a false reality constructed to simulate the appearance of comfort and routine. And it's anything but that. It is in actual fact a torture chamber for entrapped minds, and beyond that horror, even as a straight up simulation, it's detached from anything real. Every visual cue is designed to evoke familiarity, and every behavioural cue underneath it is driven by psychotic coercion. You could actually imagine Tranquility Lane as a Backrooms level, but it's deeper than that. The vibe here comes more from stagnation than decay. It's inert, it's going nowhere, the world is too intact, but it's like a body in a casket made up to look better than it really is. No one can leave, and no one, well, apart from you and your father, arrives. All the inhabitants repeat lines, repeat behaviours, and have no idea they're doing it. The entire neighbourhood is stuck in a kind of choreographed purgatory, a diorama built to lull the mind into compliance. What makes Tranquility Lane even more effective is that it lacks any real exit until you perform the actions required of you, and until you figure those out, you're as trapped as anyone else. Similar to the other places we've looked at so far, it's a place you want badly to escape from, but that makes you want to explore it too. You can't turn away from the uncanniness of it. And if Tranquility Lane is unsettling because it pretends to be real, then the out-of-bounds spaces in the pit are disturbing because you can unwittingly force the game to stop pretending altogether. The pit is already one of Fallout 3's bleakest locations, a city reduced to rust and ash, skyscrapers gutted, industry frozen mid-collapse. Even within the playable boundaries it feels hostile and oppressive, but step outside those boundaries, whether accidentally through collision failure, camera clipping or sheer curiosity, and it gets even worse. Players who slipped out of bounds in the Steelyard often described the same reaction, a sudden, childlike dread. Not fear of enemies or death, but a creeping sense that reality itself was breaking down. Buildings lose detail and become silhouettes, textures flatten, the skyline remains, but it feels hollow like a stage backdrop. Unlike the intentional liminal spaces we've looked at so far, out-of-bounds spaces don't represent anything other than that which exists beyond focused design intent. The city exists here only as an outline. The idea of Pittsburgh remains, but its substance is gone. You're walking through what amounts to scaffolding, the bones of a space that only works when viewed from the correct angle within the correct limits. What makes this particularly effective in the pit is how close the illusion still feels. You can often see the city proper just beyond the boundary, but it's unreachable. I came across players on Reddit describing this as a reality crumbling sensation, and that's an accurate way to put it. Fallout 3 usually does an excellent job of convincing you that its world is continuous even when it isn't. The pit out of bounds areas puncture that illusion. Suddenly you're outside the purported real city. It's a reality you're standing beside rather than inside. The difference is subtle but deeply unsettling. This taps into that specific kind of liminal dread that the internet has become increasingly attuned to, the fear of seeing behind the environment. In the Backrooms, for instance, that fear comes from endless office spaces that feel generated rather than designed, the extra places, the scaffolding behind the curated real world. In the pit's void, you're seeing it from that perspective, where the world's certainty collapses into abstraction. This is where the childhood dread we mentioned earlier often enters the picture. Several players who encountered these spaces early in their gaming lives described a deep, visceral discomfort. They didn't understand what was happening, but they felt it instinctively. Just like no clipping into the Backrooms, they were simply there, in a place they weren't meant to be. Anyway, that's our first foray into the not meant to be seen category. We'll be seeing more of that later. Before that though, we're moving on to Fallout 4 and a few choice spaces from the Commonwealth, and we're going to start in Vault 111. It's not a dungeon in the strictest sense, there aren't really many enemies, a few rad roaches, no boss fights, no big puzzles. Instead it presents something more subtly disturbing. A sterile, orderly piece of infrastructure that was meant to come back to life but never did. The vault is built as a literal threshold, a place of transition meant to preserve people from pre-war America and pull them into some undetermined future, holding them in cryogenic stasis while the world outside moves on. But instead of transition, what Vault 111 delivers is perpetual suspension. The machines hum, the lights still work, but the people, the purpose is in stagnation. The place itself is in suspension as much as the people in the cryopods. Liminality, in the way players often use the term online, isn't necessarily about fear as much as a sense of dislocation. A place or moment where you're caught between states, and Vault 111 takes that idea and literalizes it. In architectural liminality, the kind discussed in online liminal spaces communities where surreal photos are shared, the most disturbing spaces are the ones that seem in use but are not. Office buildings with every chair in place but no workers, malls with fluorescent lighting but no customers. Vault 111 operates in the same register. The place is functional but nobody is there to operate it. The space doesn't really do anything other than exist, and that static existence, so total, so calm, leaves you feeling as though you're standing in a place that exists outside the walls of normal reality and outside the bounds of time itself. Next, we're going to look at Nuka-World, which could so easily be a Backrooms level. Bright colours peeling under bleak skies, rides frozen mid-cycle, mascots staring blankly out over the destroyed park. It's almost cliched when it comes to this sort of vibe. A number of players on r/liminal spaces gaming and other communities describe the same sensation. Stepping into Nuka-World is unsettling because of how unchallenged normality persists in an environment that has no real normality left. You see concession stands, queue railings, festive signage, and pathways leading you towards attractions you recognise from real-world amusement parks. But there's no sound of laughter, no ambient chatter, no music from the rides, just silence and decay. This kind of environment sits squarely within what liminal space theory calls the constructed normal. Private homes, hospitals, schools, these are spaces built for human activity. When they're empty or paused, they invite a very specific psychological response. Nuka-World does this on an industrial scale. What makes it feel this way is the absence of use. A theme park has design logic, paths guide you, entrances beckon, rides suggest motion. But once that motion is gone, what's left is a space that looks familiar but feels fundamentally blank, weird and uncanny. The psychological effect is comparable to real-world empty malls at night. The built environment promises human activity, but the activity never arrives. For a moment, if you squint your eyes, you're not in a post-apocalypse, but in a theme park before opening time. Nuka-World is creepy, but it makes sense. But then there are spaces that feel eerie because they were never meant to make sense in the first place. Vault 118's interior beach, a stretch of sand and salt water nestled deep inside a subterranean vault, is one of the most jarring examples of this. When most people think of a vault in Fallout, they imagine bunkers, sterile corridors, and sealed chambers built to protect life from nuclear fire. And for the most part, that's accurate. Vault 118, however, has a section that diverges from that expectation sharply. Inside, the designers placed a beach, complete with sand, shallow water, and the suggestion of a wider environment in an interior space. It is, in architectural terms, a practical impossibility, a shoreline and sky where no sea or open air could ever be, an uncanny valley recreation of reality. The first moment you step onto that sand, it's impossible not to feel the dissonance. Liminal spaces, as we know, are typically defined by the in-betweenness they represent: thresholds, abandoned corridors, destinations that never quite arrive. Vault 118's beach doubles down on that effect by seemingly existing outside of everything else. You're underground, miles from any real coast, and yet here is a shoreline. It's a dreamlike representation of a beach, a flimsy fantasy deep underground that completely breaks your expectations of environmental logic. Players on Reddit have described this area as surreal and wrong. That sense comes from the fact that our brains are exquisitely tuned to know what's real and what isn't. The beach setting is clearly unreal. That exact quality is the root of its liminality. It has enough of the elements for our brains to recognise it as a beach, but lacks the reality in such a way as to make it inherently spooky. There's a particular sensation in open world games that rarely gets talked about in formal analysis, yet every player recognises it. The feeling you get when you get a bit too close to the edge. In Fallout 4, that sensation surfaces most clearly at the edge of the map, when the carefully crafted simulation of the Commonwealth starts to give way. In my trawling of Reddit and other player communities, one particular observation kept reappearing: the edge of Fallout 4 feels wrong. To understand why the edge of the map feels so strange, consider how games build the world. In most of Fallout 4's explorable terrain, the environment is rich with cues that it's part of a larger, coherent place. The Commonwealth is designed to feel like a place where people are living, where everything has a reason. But when you reach the edge of the map, that sense of depth collapses. In a sense, you're getting the same feeling as you would if you no-clipped out of reality into the Backrooms. The space beyond, even if just suggested, isn't for you. It has no purpose, it isn't meant to be seen or perceived, but it's there, and you know it's there. There's an element of the old saying here: stare long enough at the void and it starts staring back at you. I think that's the feeling players were trying to describe, and it's certainly one I recognise. We're moving on to Fallout New Vegas now, and I have to say I feel that it is the most liminal of all of the 3D Fallout games. To me, New Vegas often feels like it's in permanent twilight, and that isn't even because of night or day, or I'm not even sure how to describe it. Sometimes it feels uncanny just because the sun is shining above the broken world. It's like emerging from the cinema after watching a horror movie into a summer's day. It's a juxtaposition that's happening in the moment, every moment you're experiencing the world. Our first example from New Vegas is the Bison Hotel. If you arrive in Prim from the north, it's one of the first buildings you'll see, a squat, sand-coloured structure wrapped in rusted roller coaster tracks. The Bison Hotel once promised all the trappings of a fairly modest resort getaway. By the time the player arrives in 2281, it has become something else entirely, an unmarked location taken over by convicts and emptied of any real purpose. Once you clear the hostiles out, it becomes even more frightening with the stillness and silence. The bland, dark corridors and spaces genuinely do feel like some kind of variant of the mouldering corridors of the Backrooms itself. I vividly remember my first playthrough of New Vegas, where I wanted to explore absolutely everything. But at this early stage of the game, despite my completionist tendencies, I just wanted to run out of the building and back out into the daylight. I don't know what it was, somehow I just felt as though something was waiting for me just around the corner. Back outside and heading southwest from Prim, you'll eventually reach the Mojave Outpost, a fortified NCR checkpoint straddling the California-Nevada border. It's a transitional zone by design, one of the few places in New Vegas that openly acknowledges the pre-war interstate system and the NCR's territorial reach back into the west. On the surface, it's a functional NCR logistics hub, but I've long fixated on something stranger, the gate at the far end of the outpost. It's locked, and of course, a locked gate is going to cause an unhealthy obsession. What makes it compelling is that the road behind it does exist, at least partially. Using console commands or glitches, it's possible to bypass the gate entirely. Activate TCL, toggle collision, or force your way through, and you'll find yourself walking a long, uninterrupted stretch of desert road. It's rendered, textured, and in-engine, but devoid of content. No enemies, no loot, no quest markers. The power lines stretch into the distance, and the cracked tarmac continues beyond the map's functional limits until the world eventually dissolves into a void. This is where the term liminal fits precisely. You're in a place that exists and doesn't. It's not cut content in the traditional sense, nor is it fully abandoned. You are just not supposed to be there. It's geography without narrative, a half-imagined highway pointing to something bigger that isn't there. Players who wander beyond the outpost this way often describe the experience in terms of mood. A long walk under a blank sky. It feels like you're exiting the game, like you've stepped into an abandoned, unfinished part of its world building. A map that could possibly once have had future plans. A zone with the uncanny vibes by virtue of an unintended glitched piece of player agency. Your unwelcome intrusion. In fact, this area was so evocative that it inspired an entire web series, something we'll be looking at later in the video. Moving on to New Vegas itself, we're going to be looking at the Lucky 38, which I consider to be one of the spookiest places in the entirety of Fallout New Vegas. The Lucky 38 itself is unique. It is one of the few casinos on the strip that's not operational. The environment the player enters is muted, sealed, empty. The strip outside feels alive, but the Lucky 38's interior is contrasted by absence. It is, to all intents and purposes, an abandoned place. Looking at the casino floor, it is just spooky. That's the only way it can be described. I don't really know how to find the words to describe what I feel when I'm wandering around inside this space. It just makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I haven't even gotten to the spookiest parts of this building yet. I know if you're a Fallout New Vegas player watching this that you know what I'm describing here. It is just something off about the area. It feels wrong, like you're not meant to be there. Further inside the Lucky 38's interior lies the Presidential Suite, another space of implied function. Yet, like the lounge, it's devoid of life and feels like a well-preserved abandoned place. Similarly to other places we've looked at, what ties the suite to liminality is how it occupies a transitional category. Suites by design are residential, they imply a private life lived within their walls. But the presidential suite is not inhabited in the context of the player's game world until you show up. But you know it would have been long ago. It's just a dusty, creepy space. You can only ever feel like a guest, it's never really yours. I imagine staying there to be akin to sleeping in a hotel room you know someone died in. And now we enter the creme de la creme of Fallout liminality. The cocktail lounge sits at the top of the Lucky 38. It has the layout and ornamentation of a classic casino VIP bar, polished surfaces, lounge seating, a bar counter, ringed lighting fixtures, all rendered in New Vegas's signature retro-futuristic style. These details indicate intended use, but when experienced in-game, none of these cues resolve into actual activity. No bartender, no lounge patrons, no music score distinct from the subdued ambient howling wind track. It's a destination that almost forces transitional behaviour. In many cases, I'm sure the player enters once and then moves on from it. If you're me, anyway, you'd be running out of the place. I find it to be absurdly creepy. Let's just take a moment to soak up the atmosphere here, listen to the sounds, and tell me it isn't just the creepiest place in the entire Fallout franchise. Vault 21 is one of the few Vault-Tec shelters in New Vegas that survived the Great War and was repurposed into a hotel and gift shop on the New Vegas Strip. The upper levels, converted into commercial and living space, are fully explorable and actively used in several quests. Beneath that public-facing portion, however, lies an area of the vault that is inaccessible during normal play, an unused hallway and rooms that players have discovered through console commands. This unused space sits apart from the hotel and functioning vault areas, revealing a part of the world that was present in the game files but never purposefully engaged by the playable narrative, which gives it a distinctly spooky quality. Most notably, there exists a sub-basement hallway that runs beneath the accessible sections, but it is walled off behind locked doors that have no key or gameplay trigger to open them. Because players know it's there but can't reach it without exploits, it fits well with discussions of liminal space that involve thresholds. Spaces that should go somewhere or should have a purpose but instead remain unresolved and structurally unfulfilled. Are blocked off and not meant to be seen but can be accessed and give that feeling of seeing something forbidden. I took a deep look into Old World Blues in another video, but it would be crazy not to mention the specific liminality of Higgs Village here. I won't go into the story of the place here other than to say it is the former residence of the think tank, the scientists who run the Big Empty. If you want to know more specifics about the backstory, check out my video The Sheer Horror of Old World Blues. What we'll be focusing on here is its atmosphere of quiet emptiness, a place that gestures towards normal life but is uncanny, giving a strange vibe of abandonment and unreality. The layout itself is simple, 6 houses arranged around a central inactive fountain. Each house is linked to one of the Big Empty scientists and is packed with personal effects, obsessive decorations, or signs of deteriorated mental states. But it's not the connection to the former residents that causes the uncanny valley feeling, it's the mood of the place. There are no threats, it's eerily quiet, even the lighting feels fixed in a kind of permanent dusk. It's the stillness that draws attention. Higgs Village is entirely sealed off from the rest of the game world, accessible only through the central warehouse structure. You enter and it's like stepping onto a theatrical set with no actors. Unlike other spaces in the Mojave, Higgs Village is contained, symmetrical and static. Its suburbia rendered sterile by the absence of life, a kind of ghost suburb, a memorial to people neither living nor dead. That's what makes it liminal, I'm not kidding. Like some other examples I've mentioned, it genuinely feels like it could be a Backrooms level. It's preserved in a way that makes you feel like you shouldn't be there, and that's what gets under your skin. And similarly to other places I've discussed, I had that feeling of wanting to run away from the place, that unsettling feeling that if I stay, something bad will happen. Not every liminal space is abandoned, of course. Some feel that way because they're still working, but just barely. Camp McCarron is one of the game's busiest locations, yet I've often seen players single it out in Reddit threads as particularly unsettling. Not because it's spooky in a traditional sense, but because it feels wrong in a familiar way. It's weird because even though it's populated, it feels empty and cold. Part of what defines Camp McCarron's vibes in this regard is its location inside a pre-war airport terminal. Like many places in New Vegas, this gives it a repurposed quality, a structure that once served a bustling civilian function, now turned into a military site. The terminal is laid out like you'd expect, but with a Vegas twist. Wide check-in spaces, escalators, cavernous ceilings, half-lit signage, and waiting areas with rows of slot machines. It's architecturally coherent and believable in the world, designed for throughput, for people to pass through on their way to somewhere else, but no one's travelling anymore. In a Reddit thread discussing non-scary locations that scare the hell out of you, a top comment singles out McCarron for exactly this reason. It's not empty, it's functional, but it's barely holding together, and the mood of the place, exhausted, desperate, creates a tension that feeds into the uneasiness. Then there's the monorail station attached to the airport. The station itself is tucked into a claustrophobic nook. The monorail car itself, once boarded, feels like a hollow tube. There's no one inside, no conductor, no passengers. There's just something strange about the setting that makes my skin crawl. God knows I've said it a few times, but I can't even describe the feeling I get being in the place. It's just so weird. Maybe I'm a strange guy or something, but whatever. This little section really gives me the fear for some reason. It doesn't make sense. I guess I imagine how I'd feel if I was trapped there, if that was all there was to the world. And not all liminal spaces in New Vegas are interiors either. Some are made purely of terrain. In fact, some of the most unsettling areas in the game aren't places at all, but stretches of land that seem strangely empty. Particularly if their purpose is never stated outright, or it's obscure, or it seems like it was cut, or just non-existent. One particularly strong example I've noticed is the entire right-hand side of the map, and it wasn't just me that picked up on it. Several players on r/FNV and r/liminal space described this area as liminal by design. A harsh desert of rock and sand with very little population, little loot, and no real quest justification. It exists, it's navigable, but it doesn't feel meant to be navigated. I'd go further and say it's liminal by omission. Design documentation and cut content notes confirm that areas on the eastern edge of the Mojave were impacted by development time constraints. There was supposed to be so much more there, mostly Legion-based content, settlements and so on. The land was laid out, but nothing was placed there. There are some things around though. The Deathclaw promontory, for instance, is reachable but entirely unmarked on the map. Somehow, it just feels like a leftover experiment to me, or something put there so there was something there rather than just totally empty space. While we're on the topic of the Deathclaw promontory, I'm probably alone in this, and I feel like a bit of a weirdo even saying it, but once again I found the place to be spooky for reasons I can't explain. It's way more than it being a place with dangerous enemies, or even that it's isolated. I don't know. It feels like something you're not supposed to be able to reach. If that makes any sense to any of you, let me know. If it doesn't make any sense, feel free to tell me that too. Another weird location that perfectly embodies the idea of liminality through abandonment is Searchlight Airport. Located southeast of Camp Searchlight, the airport sits quietly in the middle of the wasteland with almost no in-game explanation or purpose. It has no major quests tied to it, no central story event, no voiced NPCs waiting nearby. Players find it by stumbling across it. The airport's layout is one of total abandonment. Runways stretch across the dust with rusted up aircraft scattered around it. There's a building and control tower. You can't get inside, but there are trunks with some caps to make the trek worthwhile, I suppose. You know, it's not that the airport is spooky in the traditional sense. There are no jump scares, no super terrifying monsters beyond a bunch of rad scorpions, but it feels like an unfinished space. Why does no one seem to care about it now? Surely an airport would be a strategic asset like Camp McCarron. Maybe it's the unfinished, reasonless quality that makes the place have that spooky vibe. Maybe it's the proximity and namesake with Camp Searchlight, itself a proper spooky place in its own right. Whatever the case, it could very well be a test cell or an out-of-bounds discovery given its feeling of incompleteness and lack of purpose. Whatever the case, I love it because of those qualities rather than despite them. Now, beyond the actual in-game locations or unintended out-of-bounds areas, there is a category of space in Fallout that sits even further outside the normal game world, literally the backrooms of the games themselves. These are the testing cells, developer-only environments never intended for players to see, accessed through console commands. And for the players who do encounter them, they often provoke a stronger reaction than anything explicitly designed to be frightening. A recurring question among Fallout players on forums is why these spaces feel so disturbing. They aren't hostile, they aren't dangerous, most of the time nothing happens at all. And yet, again and again, players describe an immediate sense of unease, the feeling that they've crossed a boundary they weren't meant to cross. I wonder sometimes if that feeling is both what inspired the fascination with concepts like the Backrooms and, in a chicken and the egg way, makes the spaces themselves spookier. Sort of a reciprocal thing going on, maybe. A Reddit thread from 2024 captures this reaction quite well. The original poster was talking about testing cells specifically, the rooms built for development efficiency rather than narrative use. The replies converged on the same ideas: uncanny valley, the world behind the world, and the sense of intrusion that you're not meant to be there. As one commenter puts it was never meant to be seen by players. It's like a sort of limbo. So let's take a look at the backrooms of Fallout. I've picked some of my favourite spooky test cells from across Fallout 3, 4 and New Vegas. We'll begin with Fallout 3's test cells, and first we're going to check out one called Megaton Abandoned House Dummy Cell. When you arrive, the impact is immediate and eerie. What you're looking at is a version of the player house in Megaton, but it's not the house, it's a stripped, unfinished shell. No textures, no lighting, no clutter, no warmth. Normally, the Megaton house is a gift. It comes with narrative weight, a reward for defusing the bomb, a symbol of safety, a place to stash your loot. The space becomes lived in, but the abandoned house removes all that. It's structural, not personal, just the shape of the building, hollowed out and waiting for meaning. What makes this one different from other test cells we'll look at later is its specificity. It's not a warehouse or QA room, it's a version of your space, but it's so clearly not your space. What it is a very weird space with a very weird vibe to it. Then there's a cell called Test 1. It sits far south of the map's edge, inaccessible via normal console commands. You need to no-clip and then walk there. From Tenpenny Tower it takes about 13 minutes. That is unless you edit the ini file to remove map boundaries, and for those who go looking, the reward is, well, very strange. Just a patch of land boxed in by hills, a small pool of water, and an overwhelming sense, like the other test cells, that you've stepped somewhere you shouldn't be. The name of the test cell offers a little clue. Test 1 almost certainly refers to Juan Sanchez, one of Bethesda's world artists. Like many test cells in Fallout 3, this space likely functioned as a personal sandbox, a place to tweak terrain generation, test lighting or material blending, or experiment with environmental assets. You're not walking through content here, you're walking through someone's workspace, a developer's private corner of the void. There are some even stranger test cells. The hair testing rooms in the Hugh Lai map are perfect examples. If you know the test cell names, test QA here F, M, and test QA Hugh you can warp there instantly, and when you do, what you find is, well, peculiar to say the least. The male and female hair rooms are near identical in layout, clinical, neutral interiors populated by silent NPCs, no AI packages, no movement. Each stands rigid, modelling a different hairstyle from the game. The only difference is that the women are wearing party hats. Why? I have no idea. Players who commented on discovering these rooms described a deep discomfort, and not because of nudity or gore, it's the contextlessness that does it. These are not characters, they're props meant for inspection, not interaction, and they've been left here long enough to feel more like prisoners. The uncanny feeling increases when you remember that someone built this. Long ago, these rooms were functional, but what remains now is a kind of visual residue, an accidental morgue of faces and scalps, lit and posed forevermore with no hope of escape. Then there's Test QA Hugh. It's a separate world space entirely, named after Bethesda character artist Hugh and populated in much the same way. Nude NPCs, one raider, and floating out in the distance, static character models just hanging there in T-poses. This is how you test a rig, it's how you examine proportions, it's how you check blend shapes or morph targets or body geometry, but once the task is complete, what's left is a liminal hell. An environment with no real beginning or end. Of all the test cells buried inside Fallout 3, Test QA World is the one that most resembles a real location, and that's precisely what makes it feel so bizarre. Internally, the game refers to this area with a couple of different names. As we've said, Test QA World Origin, and interestingly, the cutting room floor suggests that it is more than likely the remnants of a cut area called Rock Creek Estates. It's a fully fledged world space, large enough that the editor can't load it all at once, and far more detailed than a typical internal use test zone would ever be. The map doesn't behave like a typical Fallout 3 world space, it lacks the crafted intent of other areas in the Capital Wasteland. No loot placements, almost no items at all, no quest triggers or meaningful incentives, it's just space and monsters. One of the first peculiar things you might notice is the terrain. Unlike the rest of Fallout 3, Test QA World is covered in burnt out trees, far more than anywhere else in the game. It gives the whole area a choked post-fire feel. This isn't the skeletal deadwood of the usual wasteland biome, it's dense, intentionally so. The packed together trees do make sense though when you consider that geographically the zone most closely resembles Rock Creek Park in real life Washington DC. This would line up with the name Rock Creek Estates and explain the more naturalistic layout. There are NPCs here, the so-called Rock Creek Hunters, who have no other assigned spawn locations anywhere in the game. Their dialogue, there's a Gwyden to the north, seems relevant to the area. In Test QA World, there is a cave surrounded by Yao-Guai on the northern edge, which supports the idea that this was the intended location for that scrapped encounter. It's a really interesting abandoned space, totally cut off from the rest of the game world, but still out there in the Fallout 3 Backrooms. Named for one of the developers, probably Grant Struthers, an environment artist on Fallout 3, T Grant World is its own exterior world space. It's a blasted urban ruin, and very quickly upon being there, it's easy to see that this was a sandbox for environmental destruction testing. Rubble textures, geometry deformation, you can see strange movement too. Scattered around the ruined buildings are actors or objects, it's hard to tell which. Performing constant, endlessly looping animation cycles. They don't interact with anything, they don't stop, they simply repeat forever. Then there's the type of cell that has the super intense version of that uncanny valley familiar feeling, especially when it's one as familiar as Vault 101. The moment Fallout 3 begins, you're inside that space. It's the first thing you hear, the first thing you see, the first environment that teaches you how the world works. But the Vault 101 demo cell isn't quite that place, it's a strange, bizarro world version of it. Parts of Vault 101 demo are clearly drawn from early versions of the main Vault sequence. Some rooms resemble their final layouts, others stop abruptly, corridors without doors, or chambers that lead nowhere. There are no named NPCs, no interactive conversations, no story triggers. The vault door, for example, doesn't open. There's only one occupant, a Mr. Handy robot, stationed near the player's entry point. He can't be meaningfully interacted with, no dialogue, no quest hooks. He's there because someone testing the space needed him to be for some purpose during development. What makes Vault 101 demo feel so strange is that you know what should happen here: the cries of a baby, the birthday party, the collapse of order in the vault leading you to leaving on your adventure. But in this version, none of that happens. Moving on to Fallout New Vegas now, there's a test cell called Test Map 01, more commonly referred to by its internal name, Backups. It's one of the largest and strangest spaces you can visit through console commands. Where other test cells focus on a specific feature, lighting, AI, nav mesh, geography, Backups is different. What makes Backups fascinating in particular is that it functions like a studio's internal clipboard, a massive flat area filled with bits of geometry, unplaced scenery, props, signage, and cut clutter. It's a reference zone, a place where developers could store, view, and duplicate environmental assets for use elsewhere in the Mojave. Some pieces are arranged logically, whereas others are dumped en masse. In places it feels almost deliberate, in others chaotic. And that sense of abandoned chaos is exactly what makes the space so strange and unnerving. And then there's Test Dance, a cell with no floor, no walls, and a single roulette table adrift in nothing. Officially, it's known in the GEC as the Mentats test level. Unofficially, it's one of the strangest developer spaces ever left in the files. When you enter Test Dance, the first thing you'll notice is what's not there. There's no visible ground. You spawn near a roulette table hanging in space with no textures beneath it and no physical support. Try to move and nothing happens. Your controls respond, but the courier doesn't. You're paralysed, pinned to a position with no agency and no escape. Technically, this is because the floor, or more precisely the nav mesh and collision geometry, is missing. The game engine treats the cell as valid, but there's nowhere for your character to go. Just silence, suspension, hanging in the void. You get the feeling of being suspended outside of reality pretty strongly here. Moving on from a roulette table with nothing around it, next we have a casino with nothing in it. 2EO Cas Low Hotel Lobby 01. A fully built casino hotel lobby that's completely devoid of detail. There's a particular kind of eeriness that comes from cells like this, locations that look sort of right, but are completely wrong. It kind of reminds me of how people describe the Men in Black, like something pretending to be human, but missing key details. This cell is a bit like that. Lighting is present, the structure is coherent, but it's just empty and missing all the trappings. All that's left is a weird space floating in the wings of the game. And then there's the green room, and this one is just plain creepy. Its construction is simple: dark tiled flooring, pale white walls with peeling detail, and a thick low fog that clouds the space from end to end. There's a single inhabitant, an unremarkable NPC labelled Recruit Legionary. He's a kind of trigger, a voice activator tied to a very specific moment. During the quest I Put a Spell on You, there's a moment where a Legion agent, Lupa, makes contact over the radio with Colonel Curtis. The Recruit Legionary NPC in the green room is used to activate Lupa's voice lines for that scene. That's the only reason this room exists. And yet, as with so many of Fallout's test cells, something about it is creepy, and in this case it just looks creepy. Moving on to Fallout 4 now, the game holds a number of interior cells that reuse familiar geometry for unfamiliar purposes. Let's take a look at an example of this: Colonial's department store. Labelled Pre-War TV Studio in the game files, it's accessible only via console command. It's the raw set for the news report shown on the television in the sole survivor's living room, where the newscaster warns of rising tensions just before the bombs fall. This inaccessible location strips away the framing of a television broadcast and lets players physically walk through the setup of that iconic scene. It's set inside a version of the sole survivor's pre-war home, but the structure is floating over a dark, empty void. Exiting the house doesn't result in falling to your death, but instead quietly resets the player back to the kitchen, trapping them inside the scene. The uncanny impression is totally baked into the setup. It feels like you're in a somewhat normal house, but a cursory glance around shows that it's anything but. In the kitchen, the newscaster model sits at a table that hovers unsupported in midair. There's another copy of the anchor positioned on the kitchen counter, repeating the motion of grabbing a slip of paper. It's simply there, repeating the loop, bizarrely. A small television set in the living room plays the same broadcast scene in the final game. Other than what we've described, there are no signs of life, no environmental storytelling, just placeholder furnishings and blank space. The house's other rooms are present but sparsely detailed. On a nearby stereo though, multiple holotapes sit unused and unlabelled, untouchable remnants of something. It's definitely up there as one of the weirder places, hovering just behind the scenes of the normal game world. Our next test cell is another weird one, but aren't they all? Labelled Vault 81 Holding Cell, the space contains just a few elements, 2 unnamed children NPCs and a door that leads directly into Vault 81. There's something intrinsically eerie about entering a room like this, mostly because of the 2 children trapped there in a place named Holding Cell. Players on Reddit theorised that the children were there as copies of 2 children from Vault 81, Austin and Erin, but the children look different, so that was rebuffed as a theory. So it remains a mystery, and an unsettling one at that. It seems the children's fate is to forever remain within this room, stuck between worlds. Our next cell, QA Smoke, is more of a bonanza of items than a creepy place, but it still has that vibe of being completely uncanny and suspended in unreality. It's basically a dilapidated plaza suspended in a void. It's pretty handy though for an Unreal Pocket dimension. It has one of every version of the game's crafting stations, weapons bench, armour, chemistry and so on, all except the settlement workshop. There are 8 chests, each packed with goodies. One contains every armour piece, another every weapon, others hold holotapes, notes, consumables, miscellaneous items, and raw scrap in large quantities. Near the centre is a terminal containing a placeholder test note which repeats the exact same message players encounter on the Vault 111 Recreation Terminal. Unlike some of the other test cells that are a bit more mysterious, QA Smoke is pretty clear in its purpose. It was obviously a place for Bethesda's developers to spawn, test and iterate on items. It still feels strange though, like all the other test cells. And then we have another called Debug Range. This is one of several quick test environments built by the devs for mechanical checks, never intended to be part of the game world. Yet, like so many of these sterile rooms, Debug Range has its own unique and weird vibe. The space is recognisably a firing range, a long flat layout with clear sightlines and distant targets, but those targets are what make the place feel disturbing. Lining the place are a ton of naked raiders all locked in T-pose, their limbs outstretched like they're about to be crucified. They aren't moving, they aren't reacting, they're like meat puppets basically, which makes it feel a bit like a torture dungeon or something. The cell also contains some useful stuff. There are workbenches for both armour and weapons, along with a set of lockers brimming with ammunition. The implication is obvious, and you've probably guessed it already. Developers would spawn here, grab supplies, mod a weapon, and start firing at the poor trapped raiders. You and I can use console commands to escape, but these NPCs will be trapped here forever. Next up, we have one of the more famous test cells, which I took a look at in my Urban Legends of Fallout 4 video, but it has to be included here too. RJ Angler Test. If you enter it, you'll find a space that feels like a developer's fever dream, overflowing with surreal set pieces. And just as strangely, when you save while inside, the name Claraland appears on the save file. The layout is cobbled together like a theatre set storage. What really makes this area feel weird are some of the props. Scattered throughout the space are bizarre and clearly intentional inclusions. A mole rat riding a motorcycle, a fish wearing a gas mask, and brooms with screwdrivers attached. These are actually sly references. The mole rat on a motorcycle is a nod to the children's book The Mouse and the Motorcycle. The gas-masked fish draws from Zodiac, a novel by Neil Stephenson, and the brooms reference Fantasia, the 1940 Disney film. There are a lot of other weird prop combinations beyond those too. It's pretty clear that this cell was a bit of a sandbox for the developers and they had some fun with it. But still, as with so much that we've looked at, the vibe can be unsettling, not because it's horrific or anything like that, but because it's wildly divergent from the tone and feeling of the rest of the game. Next we have a Nuka-World test cell, Test Bad Water, which probably serves a similar function to QA Smoke. It's an open, flat area with a load of assets scattered about the place. It kind of reminds me of the Void Dimension from the Marvel universe. There's not too much to be said about this place, but I wanted you to be able to see it anyway since it totally fits the Backrooms liminal vibes we're looking for. So as we've seen from the locations, out of bounds weirdness and test cells, the idea of liminality in Fallout, those haunting in-between spaces that feel disconnected from the game world's logic or feel like you've peered uncomfortably behind the curtain, runs strong throughout the games. But it's not simply a case of, hey that's cool, check this out among the fandom. The very idea of liminality itself, the creepiness of it, became an inspiration for an absolutely fantastic web series. I am of course referring to the Dr. Bosch saga, a surreal and pretty well known horror series set inside what would seem to be a corrupted or alternate version of Fallout New Vegas. I won't be doing a complete story overview here or anything, that's for another time. This time I'll more be discussing the liminal inspiration behind the work. The project is hugely thematically rooted in the sometimes accidental liminal feeling that's inspired by the games, obviously particularly New Vegas and the idea of glitching out of bounds at the Mojave Outpost gate. In threads across Reddit, for instance, users have discussed how the series draws directly from the feeling of being out of bounds, both physically and psychologically. Players who've explored test cells or glitched into half-finished areas know that mood and creepy feeling very well already. Sterile, uncanny, unreal. Dr. Bosch takes that atmosphere and pushes it much further into narrative horror. And it does it really, really well. I highly recommend you check out the series. I'm not going to spoil anything, just watch it yourself. You'll thank me. Before we wrap up, I wanted to let you know that I've finally managed to get the beta development build of New Vegas running on my computer, so I'll be covering that down the line. It may be that you're seeing this after it's been released, so if so, check it out. I did consider delaying this video to cover it, but I want to give it its very own spotlight because it's super fascinating. Anyway, let's wrap this up. As we've seen, the liminal spaces in the Fallout series go way beyond being confined to test cells or cut content, or even creepy locations in the games as released. The whole vibe is completely woven into the DNA of the franchise by virtue of the setting itself. From the sterile and funerary hush of Vault 111 to the long stretch of tarmac beyond the Mojave Outpost, these are locations that leave that liminal impression without having obviously tried to inspire it at all. I sometimes find myself returning to places like the Mojave Gate just to stare out at the unknown, because spaces like this force me to face something that stirs a feeling of dread in me. Unmistakable, impossible to ignore ambiguity. A sense that the world has more layers than it lets on, that something is unresolved, waiting, or simply left behind, and that the something we're seeing isn't meant for us, it's out of reach, both practically and in terms of ever gaining understanding, of ever getting any answers. Whether placed there deliberately for use by developers or to evoke the feeling, left in by oversight and accidentally uncanny, or reached through deliberate trespass, making you feel like you're somewhere you shouldn't be. These liminal spaces expand what the Fallout world already was in its soul, a world in transition, a question for which the answer hasn't yet been revealed.